With the vehicle disassembly and structural straightening completed, it's time to replace the left front frame rail. Let's see how this is done. The fixtures are removed from the bench to allow access to the seams and spot welds that need to be removed. The brake line to the left front caliper is disconnected in order to remove it from the bracket on the frame rail and then reconnected. Additional brake lines are moved out of the way on the inside of the frame rail. Next, a wire wheel is used to remove sealer from the seams and expose the spot welds that attach the frame rail to the vehicle. The front of the apron will also be replaced, so the sealer between the apron and the shock tower is also removed. More seam sealer is removed underneath the vehicle, where the frame rail attaches to the floor. With the spot welds exposed, they are removed by drilling them out with a special spot weld bit. The bit is only used to drill through the weld on the frame rail and therefore will not leave any holes in the panels that remain on the vehicle. This spot weld removal technique is used wherever spot welds will be made for attaching the new rail and where the backside of the other panel cannot be accessed for GMA MIG plug welding. Inside the vehicle, sound deadener pads require removal from the floor pan to expose some of the spot welds for the frame rail. A razor knife is used to cut the pad, and a heat gun softens the adhesive to allow for removal. A putty knife is used to lift the pad from the floor. The spot welds are located and marked, center punched, and drilled completely through with a small pilot bit. Because the frame rail will be welded with GMA MIG plug welds through the floor, the welds are drilled completely through with an 8mm drill bit. With all of the spot welds removed, an air chisel is used to separate the frame rail from the vehicle. The fixtures for the frame rail are bolted back to the bench, and the new rail is temporarily bolted to them to check the fit-up. Areas where the flanges do not fit tight are noted and adjustments are made as required. After the cowl to frame rail fit-up is corrected, the shock tower fixture is reassembled to check the position of the shock tower. The frame rail is removed, and a slight corrective pull is made to the shock tower to position it correctly. The cowl area is stress relieved to allow the shock tower to remain in position after pressure is released. With the shock tower positioned correctly, the rail is reinstalled to the fixtures to check the fit-up one last time and to mark the positions of the welds so that the flanges can be prepared and GMA MIG plug weld holes can be drilled. Before removing the frame rail, a radiator core support fit will be checked. Because of the build sequence and part geometry, this requires removal of the front half of one outer upper rail. After drilling out the spot welds, the sectioning cut line is marked and tabs are inserted to protect the inner upper rail when the cuts are made. The cut is made and the part is removed. Next, the radiator core support assembly is fit to the vehicle and an overhead measuring system is attached to the bench to verify that the radiator core support is positioned properly. The parts are removed to complete the preparation for welding. The mating flanges on the vehicle are prepped by grinding any remaining weld nuggets and removing any coatings and sealers that are present. Next, weld-through primer is applied to all areas of bare metal on interior mating flanges on the vehicle. GMA MIG plug weld holes are drilled in the rail where needed. Where the strut tower welds to the frame rail, there are 3 layers of metal. At the factory, all 3 layers were spot welded together at once. The 2 pieces of the frame rail are not spot welded together on the replacement part. Since the strut tower will be plug welded to the rail in this location, the weld locations are marked and holes are drilled through the first layer to allow the plug welds to connect all 3 layers at once. The holes are all deburred and coatings are removed from the replacement part where welds will be made. Following the vehicle maker's recommendation, weld-through primer is applied to all bare metal interior mating flanges of the replacement frame rail. With all of the mating flanges prepared, the frame rail is positioned on the vehicle, bolted back to the fixtures on the repair bench, and clamped to the cowl and strut tower. Next, a spot blaster is used to remove the weld-through primer from the inside of the plug weld holes. A piece is cut from the damaged rail and used to make practice welds. GMA MIG plug welds are made where the frame rail and apron are attached. With welding blankets in place to protect the interior, the GMA MIG plug welds are made through the floor and into the frame rail. GMA MIG plug welds are also made where the frame rail attaches to the cowl and underneath the vehicle where it attaches to the rail extension. Practice welds are made with a squeeze-type resistant spot welder in preparation for welding on the vehicle. A shunt clamp is placed on the vehicle close to where the first spot weld will be made, and the frame rail is spot welded to the rocker panel. Before installing additional parts that may hinder access, the GMA MIG plug welds are dressed. Using the old apron front as a guide, the location of the welds are marked on the new part. Holes are drilled where GMA MIG plug welds are required, and coatings are removed where spot welds will be made. Next, the apron is clamped in position and spot welded to the frame rail, shock tower, and inner upper rail. The service procedure calls for GMA MIG plug welds in a couple of locations for the apron, so those are made next and dressed before installing the radiator core support. A punch is used to make plug weld holes in the replacement radiator core support. The mating flanges on the part are prepared, and it is positioned in place on the vehicle. With the radiator core support clamped into position, the locations of the welds are marked on the frame rails off the vehicle. Next, the coatings are removed from the weld locations on the frame rails, weld-through primer is applied, and the radiator core support is clamped into place on the vehicle. A spot blaster is used to remove the weld-through primer from the plug weld holes, and the radiator support is GMA MIG plug welded in place. Next, the plug welds are dressed, and spot welds are made in the areas that have proper access. Using the removed piece as a template, the replacement outer upper rail is marked, cut to length, prepared for welding, and clamped in place on the vehicle. The sectioning joint is welded using a stitch weld technique to limit heat input, and the top and bottom flanges are attached with spot welds. With all of the welding completed and any necessary dressing of welds done, the replaced parts are sanded and prepped for the application of corrosion-resistant primer. The primer is applied and allowed to dry. Next, seam sealer is applied to all of the required seams. Textured undercoat is applied where it is specified, and the repaired front inner structure is refinished. Notice that the floor inside the vehicle is also refinished to help maintain proper corrosion protection. After refinishing, anti-corrosion compound is applied to all inside cavities of the replaced parts. The brake booster, master cylinder, and other mechanicals that were removed for access to the frame rail are reinstalled on the vehicle. Wiring is clipped in place. The drivetrain and suspension assembly are reinstalled. All necessary connections are made, and fasteners properly torqued. Next, the coolers are reinstalled, and the padding, carpet, and seat are put back into place to complete the repairs to the vehicle.